This is a section, The Price is Wrong, bringing down the cost of the energy transition. With the price of renewables now lower than fossil fuels, electric vehicles soon to be cheaper than petrol cars, excuse me, and heat pumps costing less to run than gas boilers, why is the cost of energy still so high? In this conversation, energy tech entrepreneur Greg Jackson, CEO and founder, of course, of Octopus Energy, shares how smart tech, smart policy and international cooperation can drive innovation, can cut costs and make clean energy affordable for households. So let's give a huge round of applause, please, and a warm welcome to Greg Jackson. Greg, thank you very much indeed. Now, I was watching this interview last year. It was a packed audience last year, no doubt. They're all here to hear you again this year. Octopus has just stormed the market, hasn't it? You're committed to renewables as a big push. But how do you see your role in accelerating the global net zero transition, and how's it going?
Well, thank you. First of all, if it is the same audience, I've got to think of something new to say. So give me 10 seconds. No. So look, our role is fundamentally to help policymakers around the world understand that the energy transition is not a like-for-like exchange. You're not simply replacing fossil fuels with renewables, but we're building a whole new system. Fundamentally, if you've got a petrol car, you drive it till the tank's empty, then you go and fill up. If you've got an electric car, you plug it in, and when the wind blows, you get the cheapest driving you've ever had, or indeed if the sun shines. Inventing this system means that simultaneously we need to change the way we use energy, moving from petrol transport to electric transport, moving from gas heating to electric heating, heat pumps, moving from big centralized generating stations, coal, to distributed renewables with a bit of gas when we need it, and batteries at every stage of the system. And then we need to join it all up with astonishing amounts of data so that we can optimize it. But if we do that right, the possibilities are incredible. So today in the UK, we now build houses with 8 of the 10 biggest house builders to build houses that will never have an energy bill, because they've got the right combination of heat pump, solar panel and battery. We guarantee 10 years of no energy bill. People with an electric car, if they've got a car that can charge and discharge from the grid, they get 13,000 miles of free driving. Now, in a world where politicians worry about the cost of driving, the fuel protest, the Gilets jaunes, the answer is to go electric. So I guess our job is to help people understand this and then make it real.
There must be so many innovations that cross your desk kind of week by week. Which particular ones are kind of rocking your boat right now, and how are you integrating them into your operations?
You know what, I sometimes feel so boring on this because I meet incredible people who are working on nuclear fusion or satellite solar. But the fundamental one, I think, is actually, I just hinted at it, it's digitization. And to give you an idea, by the way, about the extent of the opportunity and the need for change. In the UK alone, Octopus processes 300,000 rows of data per second. Right? Now that is 30 times more than Visa for its entire global payments network. And we do that today when only 5% of the cars on the road are electric, when most homes don't have batteries and solar panels. The extent to which digitization can completely transform our energy system is astonishing, but we're only just beginning. And I think one of the great challenges, it's amazing to me, I think of grids as being technology companies, incredible engineers who can do incredible things. But when it comes to the digital side, we're kind of living in the Stone Ages. I think one energy executive said to me, look, we used to think of big data as a monthly meter reading. And I think really energy needs to get its head around like modern digital technology and the use of AI to optimize this system so that instead of renewables putting costs up and creating a more fragile system, they bring costs down and create a more resilient one. And look, I talked about resilience, by the way. Look, last week, I had the astonishing privilege of addressing the team at DTEK. DTEK is the Ukrainian energy company that are managing to keep the lights on the vast majority of the time under astonishing attack. And what they wanted to talk about was how do they do more digitization, because one of the keys there has been decentralization. I think it's famous, they built 200 times more wind turbines onshore than the UK during their war. That is the resilience you get from a digitized, decentralized grid. And look, the jury's out on what's happened in Spain and Portugal. But it is very clear that if they had had the flexibility that the UK has or is building, and that we are going to need vastly more of, they may well have been able to absorb the shocks that caused that grid failure. So I think we need to understand that energy needs to become like, in the old days, if you want to make a car safe, you just put more and more steel in. And then they discovered that actually crumple zones were better. If you want to make a building earthquake resilient, you allow it to flex. And our energy system needs to do the same.
Things are changing so fast, though. I mean, you talk about, building data and digitization, the impact of AI that must be really quite significant in the way that you do business. On the stage last year, you talked about how things are moving so fast that agility is absolutely critical, that quite often decisions that are made by their implementation, the world's moved on again. How do you future-proof Octopus?
Well, I think that agility question, I think, is so important. Time and again, people in energy say, look, we need a 15-year plan. We need a 25-year guarantee. We need a 10-year program. And yet we've got a world where, like 15 years ago, the iPhone came into existence. Anything you built prior to understanding the iPhone would have been a mistake. And yet we are today committing ourselves to energy solutions that won't deliver benefits for that length of time. And we should challenge ourselves and say, look, again, actually mentioning the iPhone, look, by the way, I'm so conscious, every year if I talk about the iPhone, there are people who probably don't know that one time there was this company called Nokia, and they made the mobile phones, then Apple did the iPhone and the world changed. But when Apple launched the iPhone, there was about 6 months when you couldn't get a mobile signal because suddenly the phone used so much data. But the engineers just had to move very, very fast to accommodate this. And within 6 months, they were building out networks at a pace. If you'd asked them how long it would take, they'd have said 10 years. But when they had to, they did it fast. And I think we need to think of energy like that. During the energy crisis, Germany built 5 liquid natural gas terminals, projects that were going to take a decade, and it did 5 of them in 1 year. And I spoke about this, and I said, why can't we do the same with grids, with renewable generation, with digitization? And a former energy secretary said, oh yeah, but Greg, that was a crisis. And forgive me for language, but fucking hell, our climate is a crisis, and a far more serious one than the temporary gas crisis, which was terrible. But we moved heaven and earth to deal with it. If we can't get more agile in energy, all we're going to do is bake it. It's like building shopping centers in the age of e-commerce, right? So we really need to get more agile so we build the right stuff in the right places. And we have a moral duty to do it, because if we can't make renewable power the cheapest power, and people are forced to choose, they'll vote for fossil fuels instead. And so I say to anyone who's in renewables, it's great to be paid handsomely for what we do, but honestly, it is our job to do what Jeff Bezos said, which is, he said there are companies that work hard to charge customers as much as possible, and those who work hard to charge them as little as possible. And we need to be the latter, and we absolutely have to.
So can you talk us through your key strategies then for grid modernisation, and how you counteract the difficulties of bureaucracy that sometimes will impede development?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that our bureaucratic decision-making cycle is typically a 5-10 year cycle. And so you, like right now, for example, I don't know, some of you might have read about something called zonal pricing. I talk about it a lot in the media. But it's something that governments have been discussing for over a decade. And without creating a crisis around it, you're not forcing decision. And without decision, it doesn't matter what your view on the topic is, you can't make investment decisions. Now, what I would say is we started that conversation as a nation before we'd built out so much of our current infrastructure. But nobody can look themselves in the mirror today and say it's acceptable that our biggest offshore wind farm is paid to generate nothing 71% of the time it could be generating. That our biggest wind farms get paid more to not generate than to generate. And that everybody's electricity bill pays that. And even if you don't care about that, what that means is that sooner or later we end up in a world, as we see, for example, with the AFD in Germany, with some parties here in the UK now, and of course with the new government in the US, where they are literally banning wind farms, banning solar. They're banning the stuff that will save us because we've allowed the narrative, and in fact sometimes the reality, to be that that's pushed costs up. And I think if any of us want to be able to deliver the solution for the future that we believe in, we now have to do whatever it takes to cut costs, or by the way, look, we won't have businesses in clean energy.
You speak with so much enthusiasm, it's contagious, but not everybody has got the same view. As a consumer, it can be quite confusing. How do you ensure a simplification of messaging across the board?
You know what, Natasha? The lovely people backstage were panicking because I hadn't come through, right? And even as I came through the door there, a lovely guy grabbed me and he said, "I'm one of your customers." And honestly, when people say that, I'm always like, there's a bit of me that's proud because only 9 years ago we didn't exist. There's also a bit of me that's nervous because they'll say my smart meter doesn't work or something. And I genuinely would try and sort that, and I'm sorry. But actually what he said was, I've just changed my energy program with you because of the video that you sent. And I think that, look, it suited energy as a sector. A very senior civil servant economist, he said, it suited energy as a sector to keep quiet, keep their heads down, and hope that people paid the bills. But in this time of change, we need to flip that, and we need to find every way we can of talking to customers about, look, at the end of the day, first of all, it doesn't matter if you keep your heads down, energy is typically the third biggest outgoing for most households. A recent survey said that cost of living was the most important issue in politics in the UK, ahead of the NHS, ahead of education, ahead of immigration, and that energy bills were the #1 item within cost of living. That's how important this topic is to the people of Britain. And we can either hide from it or lean into it. And if we lean into it, we can listen to them and find ways to help. And in terms of finding ways to help, first of all, it doesn't have to be bamboozling. You don't need a 3-page PDF for an energy bill. It's a bit like shopping at Tesco. You get a receipt that's this long, but you just need to look at the bottom, right? And we can help people understand that. But then we can say, look, if you're okay running your dishwasher or doing your cooking a little bit later in the evening, maybe 7 o'clock rather than 6 o'clock, we can save you hundreds of pounds on your energy bill, or even just 10p. And people go, but great, 10p is not worth anything. Like, the UK stopped using carrier bags because of 10p. And if you if shifting your dishwasher half an hour feels like a hassle, can you remember when, I still do it. You go to the checkout and you're carrying your eggs and your sausages and you're bouncing everything on your elbow for 10p.
Yeah.
Now, if energy can't learn from sectors like retail about how to communicate all this complex market in a simple way, honestly, we don't deserve to get our bills paid.
It wasn't for 10p, it was for an ideal, wasn't it?
And so it is with climate, right?
Yeah.
If I say you'll save 10p and your energy will do no harm to the planet, that's probably even better than saving 10p on a carrier bag that you might use again.
So Octopus has only been out there for 9 years. You've kind of cornered a really big part of the market. What are your ambitions for the future?
Yeah, I think, first of all, allow me to be quite personal about this. I think in business terms, the UK has become under-ambitious. So when we were starting the company, someone said to me, how are you going to take on, they named a big energy company in the UK. And I said, they're only big in Britain. No one in America's heard of them, right? Amazon didn't set out to try and be CaliforniaCornerShops.com, right? They set out to create a world meaningful business. And I think in the same way, it is our job to say, look, the UK actually provided an astonishingly good incubator for what we've done. The free market in energy, which they don't have in the US, enabled us to bring new ideas to customers that helped customers save money whilst cleaning the planet, whilst digitizing the grid, all the stuff we talked about. But we've been able to take that to France and Italy and Germany and Spain and Japan and New Zealand and to a tiny bit of the US. And we've got to keep taking these ideas and building, what I hope, people talk about Britain being a world leader in clean power. Our job is to try and do that. And so first of all, take what we've learned here, export it around the world. We've created 11,000 jobs in 9 years doing this. And that's just directly, never mind the supply chain. But then also continue investing in the technology, because I think we've only just scratched the surface of what we can do with digitalization and flexibility. I talked earlier about things like when we've got a car with a battery that goes both ways, we can give you 13,000 miles free driving. Some research I've seen recently, based on data, our behavioural data, is that if 90% of UK cars end up being a bi-directional EV, it reduces total UK emissions by 55%. Now, if we can keep taking learnings like that to the world, I think we can be a leader in clean power.
So it's extraordinary to see the success of profile that you've been building, but essentially that's built on partnerships as well and collaboration. What are your future goals with that globally then? Because it doesn't sound like your sites are just in UK shores.
No, well, and first of all, partnerships are really important. I see some people over there with E.ON t-shirts. E.ON's a major partner. They've worked with us on a lot of the digitisation. EDF, I think I've seen someone. We work with EDF on how do you electrify Britain. And I think, look, we've got to learn from the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel companies will collaborate on exploration, and then one of them will sell licenses to the other. Then they'll extract the stuff and sell it to another, who'll then transport it, who'll then sell it. The only way we can do this is by the electricity industry. Because, by the way, look, the decarbonisation, the number one thing with decarbonisation is electrification, right? Even if you run an EV on electricity from a gas power station, its emissions are lower than a petrol car. Even if you run a heat pump on electricity from a gas power station, it emits less than a gas boiler. So I think focusing on how do we electrify everything, and the electricity industry being as grown up in driving that as the fossil fuel industry have been in, first of all, growing and then defending their business, that's a global mission that electrification requires those companies to work together.
And there are many steps that need to be taken in order for that to happen. Do you actually think it's possible?
Look, it's being very candid, that the CEO of a major oil company, I had dinner with him, and he said, look, Greg, the thing is, electricity companies grew up essentially as part of government. They're essentially doing what governments tell them. Whereas we, as oil companies, invest and innovate at our own risk. And as a result, we've drilled, 2,000 kilometer, pipelines. We drilled under the, we've done incredible science. And he said the electricity companies, the electricity industry, now needs to learn from us on how to do this. And I think that's genuinely something we should take, which is, look, if you look at the numbers in energy, in electricity, the revenues of electricity companies are in the many, many billions. But how much of that do they risk in driving innovation and driving innovation at scale? They don't. They sit there and they ask governments to pay for it. And I think we'll build better, more resilient companies that will drive the transition faster if energy companies take a fraction of a % of their revenue and deploy it in R&D. And I'm talking here about the West. I was recently in China, and one company alone employed 100,000 people in research and development. They employed 30,000 on a single campus that was so big it had got 3 metro lines to get around, and 8,500 of those were working on clean energy. 20 years ago, 5% of global clean energy patents were Chinese. Today, it is 75%, right? Alongside AI, clean energy should be the next equivalent of the tech industry, and we are completely losing the race because we're failing to invest in innovation and we're not putting customers first.
We're right out of time, Greg. I'm going to ask you one final question. I'm sure you're in and out of number 10, giving advice to different prime ministers over the years. If you actually occupied number 10 Downing Street, what would you do?
Yeah, with electricity, well, look, first I'd say electrification is the key, and I'd take the levies off off electricity, and put at least some of them on gas, so we reduce the outrageous distortion in the UK market. I think the UK has got the biggest gap between electricity price and gas price in Europe, which is really slowing down our move to clean energy. And then I'd introduce a far more dynamic digitized market. You could introduce zonal pricing in 18 months according to Arup, and that would mean that by 2028, across the whole UK, we'd be paying less for electricity, but we could also make sure that every investment going forward is in a place that will make a more efficient, cheaper, more flexible system. And I think if we can get on that trajectory, if year in, year out, the delivery of clean technologies will be bringing bills down, making driving cheaper, making homes cheaper to heat, then I don't think net zero is a political hot potato. It becomes an absolute no-brainer, and it creates jobs and economic growth. It helps foster new industries, AI and clean industry like clean steel, and that's how we get Britain on a better trajectory.
Greg, I was really looking forward to talking to you, and you certainly didn't disappoint. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, to Greg Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.